The town of Willowbrook had always been a quiet place, tucked away between rolling hills and thick forests that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was a town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep, and where life followed a slow, predictable rhythm. But all of that changed when Silas Corbin arrived. No one knew exactly when he had come to town. Some claimed they had seen him wandering the streets months before anyone spoke his name, blending into the background, studying the town like an artist examining a blank canvas. Others insisted that he had simply appeared one day, his presence as sudden as a shift in the wind. What was certain was that once he arrived, everything changed. Silas was not a man of grand entrances. He did not demand attention, he commanded it. His presence alone was enough to make people pause. He was not particularly tall, nor did he dress extravagantly, but his eyes, icy blue and sharp as broken glass, had a way of holding a person captive. His voice, deep and smooth, could wrap around a person like a comforting embrace, yet his words carried a weight that lingered long after they were spoken. And words were his most dangerous weapon. At first no one questioned him. He claimed to be a traveler, a man looking for a place to call home. He spoke of the failings of the world, of a society that had lost its way, and of his vision for something better. He started with the lost and the desperate, the ones who needed something to believe in. Margaret Hale, a widow who had never recovered from the disappearance of her only son, found solace in his words. Darren Mathers, a disillusioned war veteran, saw in Silas the structure and purpose he had been missing. Evelyn Carter, a runaway teenage girl, found a home in the family he promised. Silas spoke to them not as strangers, but as if he had known them forever. He told them their pain was not their fault. He understood their suffering better than anyone else, and they believed him. The rise of the Corbin family. The Corbin family, as his followers began to call themselves, grew in numbers. What had started as a small gathering of misfits soon became something much larger. They moved into an old farmhouse deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. Some in town whispered that it had once belonged to a farmer who had vanished years ago, a mystery that had never been solved. At first, it seemed harmless. People joined Silas voluntarily, seeking refuge, community, and meaning. They wore simple homespun clothes, abandoned their old lives, and became something else. Then the disappearances started. The first to vanish. It began with a drifter, a man who had been passing through town. He had been seen with the Corbin family one night, talking, laughing. No one saw him again. Then it was Timothy West, a young man who had never quite fit in. He had dinner with his parents one evening, left for a drive, and never returned. His car was found abandoned on a dirt road near the Corbin property, the keys still in the ignition, the driver's side door left wide open. Whispers spread through town, but it wasn't until Sheriff Tom Grayson took notice that people truly began to fear Silas Corbin. Sheriff Grayson's warning. Sheriff Tom Grayson had spent his entire life in Willowbrook. He had seen it all: small-town disputes, teenage mischief, the occasional crime that rattled the community. But nothing like this. Grayson was not a superstitious man. He did not believe in ghosts or magic or prophets, but he believed in evil, and Silas Corbin reeked of it. One evening, just after sunset, Grayson decided to pay the Corbin compound a visit. He drove alone, his patrol car navigating the winding dirt road that led into the forest. The deeper he went, the thicker the trees became, their twisted branches reaching across the road like skeletal fingers. Then he saw them, figures standing in the fields, watching him. They wore loose, simple clothing, their faces expressionless. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched. When Grayson finally reached the farmhouse, He was met with silence, no voices, no movement, just the eerie stillness of the night. Then, the front door creaked open. Silas Corbin stood in the doorway, his hands folded neatly in front of him, a slow, knowing smile on his lips. "Sheriff Grayson," he said, his voice calm, almost welcoming. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Grayson didn't waste time. "We've had reports of missing people, Corbin. Your name keeps coming up." Silas tilted his head slightly as if amused. "Missing? No one is missing, Sheriff. People come here because they are searching for something. And when they find it, why would they leave?" Grayson's grip tightened on the handle of his gun. "That's not an answer." Silas took a slow step forward, the wooden porch creaking beneath his weight. "Maybe not the one you want," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But the truth rarely is." Grayson narrowed his eyes. He knew what Silas was doing, playing mind games, twisting words. He had interrogated criminals before, men who could lie without blinking. But Silas was different. Silas wasn't lying. Silas believed every word he spoke, and that made him far more dangerous. Grayson left that night, but he had made up his mind. He was going to shut Silas Corbin down. The sheriff's disappearance. A week later, Sheriff Tom Grayson vanished. His patrol car was found abandoned on the side of the road, its emergency lights still flashing. The driver's side door was open, the engine still running. His gun was missing from its holster. His radio had been ripped out. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no blood, no tire tracks leading away. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The town of Willowbrook had always been quiet, but after that night, it became something else entirely. Silent. And deep in the woods, Silas Corbin smiled. His family had grown, and he had bigger plans. Sheriff Tom Grayson's disappearance shook Willowbrook to its core. He wasn't just the law, he was the town's backbone, the one person people trusted to protect them. And now, he was gone, leaving behind only an empty patrol car, a missing gun, and a town paralyzed with fear. The townspeople knew who was responsible: Silas Corbin. But knowing and proving were two very different things. The Corbin family had grown, and their influence stretched further than anyone realized. Those who had joined them never returned, and their loved ones were left with nothing but silence. Some went to the farmhouse, begging to see their missing relatives. The ones who returned from those visits came back changed, quiet, distant, their eyes hollow, their voices flat. Some refused to talk about what had happened. Others simply disappeared again, vanishing into the woods as if the very air of the Corbin compound had swallowed them whole. A town-divided fear spread like a disease. The town fractured into two groups: those who feared Silas Corbin and wanted him gone, and those who believed in him, or, at least, were too afraid to speak against him. Those who opposed him whispered in secret. They spoke of taking action, of driving him and his followers out of town, but no one acted, because no one knew who they could trust. Some of the Corbin family's members still walked among them, acting like everything was normal, but when they spoke, their words had a strange rhythm, a calmness that wasn't natural. Their eyes never blinked enough, their smiles stretched a little too long, and worst of all, they listened. Conversations that should have been private found their way back to Silas. Plans to investigate the cult fell apart before they even began. People who spoke out against him found their homes vandalized, their pets missing, their children waking up screaming from nightmares they couldn't explain. Willowbrook was no longer a town, it was a hunting ground, and Silas Corbin was the predator. Detective Eric Langley. 2 weeks after Sheriff Grayson's disappearance, an outsider arrived in town. Detective Eric Langley, a state investigator, had been sent to look into the missing sheriff. Langley was a hardened man, built from years of dealing with cases no one else wanted, cases of small towns with big secrets, places where the law didn't reach. He had heard rumors about Silas Corbin, but nothing prepared him for what he found. As soon as he entered town, he felt the tension in the air. People wouldn't talk to him, and those who did spoke in half-truths and nervous glances. But Langley was good at his job. He knew how to read fear, and this town was drowning in it. His first stop was the abandoned patrol car, still sitting on the side of the road where Grayson had left it. He examined it carefully, running his fingers along the torn-out radio, the empty holster where Grayson's gun should have been. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the sheriff had stepped out of his car and simply ceased to exist. Langley didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in monsters, and he was starting to think Silas Corbin was one of them. The first warning. That night, Langley checked into the only motel in town. The owner, a nervous woman named Ruth Dawson, hesitated before handing him the key. "Detective," she said in a hushed voice, "you need to be careful here." Langley narrowed his eyes. "You know something, don't you?" Ruth swallowed hard. "I know that people who go looking for answers don't always come back." Langley nodded slowly. "I'll take my chances." But later that night, as he sat in his motel room going over his notes, he heard something outside his door, a soft scrape, like footsteps stopping just outside. He stood silently, reaching for his gun, his breath slow and measured. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't want whoever was out there to know he was awake. Then, the whispering started. Low, almost melodic, a voice humming a tune just beneath the range of hearing. It shouldn't have been terrifying, but it was. Langley's stomach tightened, his instincts screaming at him that something was wrong. Slowly, he moved toward the peephole, pressing his eye against it. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Langley yanked the door open, gun raised. No one was there. But at his feet lay a piece of paper, folded neatly. He bent down, picking it up with careful fingers. Inside, written in flawless looping script, were 3 words. "Stop. Looking. Now." Langley smiled. He had their attention. Good. The invitation. The next morning, Langley found a visitor waiting for him outside the motel. A woman in plain, homespun clothing. One of them. Her name, she said, was Evelyn Carter. She had once been a runaway, a girl lost in the world until Silas saved her. "You're looking for answers, detective," she said with a soft smile. "Come speak to Silas yourself. Let him tell you his truth." Langley knew a trap when he saw one, but he also knew he wasn't going to get the information he needed unless he walked straight into the lion's den. So he nodded. "I'd love to meet him," he said. Evelyn's smile widened, and for the first time, Langley saw the hunger behind it. "Then come tonight," she whispered. "He's been expecting you." The farmhouse. That night, Langley drove out to the Corbin property. The woods were too quiet, the air thick with something unseen. As he pulled up to the farmhouse, he saw them, figures standing in the darkness, watching him with unnerving stillness. Then, the front door opened. Silas Corbin stood there smiling. "Welcome, detective," he said. "I've been waiting for you." Langley didn't flinch. "I'm here for answers, Corbin." Silas gestured for him to come inside. "Then let's talk." The door closed behind him, and the night swallowed him whole. The farmhouse detective Eric Langley stepped into the Corbin farmhouse, his every instinct screaming at him to turn around. The air was thick, carrying the scent of burning herbs and something metallic underneath, a smell he recognized instantly. Blood. Silas Corbin stood in the center of the dimly lit room, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. The walls were lined with symbols carved into the wood, shapes that felt wrong, unnatural, as if they had been drawn by something that didn't belong in this world. "Please, detective," Silas said, motioning to a wooden chair. "Sit. We have much to discuss." Langley didn't move. "I'd rather stand." Silas's smile didn't falter. "Suit yourself." All around him, figures emerged from the shadows, followers of the Corbin family. They stood silently, watching Langley without blinking, their expressions empty. Evelyn Carter was among them. She no longer looked like the frightened runaway girl he had read about in the reports. She looked like something else entirely. "Where is Sheriff Grayson?" Langley asked, his voice steady. Silas chuckled. "Ah, the sheriff. He came looking for answers, too." He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Langley's. "Tell me, detective, do you believe in destiny?" Langley tightened his grip on his gun. "I believe in facts." Silas sighed. "Facts are so small, detective, so fragile. You came here because you think I am just another criminal, just another madman with a following. But you don't understand." He gestured to his followers. "We are not a cult. We are a family. A family that sees beyond the veil of this broken world. And soon, detective, you will see it too." Langley took a step back, his pulse steady, but his mind racing. Something was wrong. He could feel it, an almost electrical charge in the air, something shifting beneath his skin, a presence he couldn't explain. Silas watched him with amusement. "You feel it, don't you?" he whispered. "That pull, that voice in the back of your head, telling you that everything you know is a lie?" Langley clenched his jaw. "You're just another manipulative bastard, Corbin. You prey on the weak, the lost. But you made a mistake." Silas arched an eyebrow. "And what mistake is that?" Langley raised his gun. "You took a sheriff." Silas chuckled. Then, to Langley's horror, he took a step closer, completely unafraid. "You think that matters now?" Silas whispered. "You think that your laws have any power here?" Langley had spent years dealing with criminals, men who thought they were invincible. But this was different, because Silas Corbin truly believed he was untouchable. And worse, Langley was starting to think he might be right. The ritual. A door creaked open at the back of the room. Two followers stepped forward, dragging something heavy between them. Langley's stomach twisted when he saw what it was. Sheriff Tom Grayson. He was alive, but barely. His face was bruised, his wrists bound, his shirt stained with dried blood. But it was his eyes that sent a chill down Langley's spine. They were vacant, unfocused, like he was staring at something no one else could see. Langley lunged forward, but several hands grabbed him, pulling him back with unnatural strength. Silas watched with a smile. "You see, detective, we are on the brink of something great," he said softly. "And the sheriff, well, he was simply the first to bear witness." Langley struggled, but the hands holding him were ironclad. Around him, the Corbin family began to chant, their voices low and rhythmic, sending a chill through his bones. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift, as if they were alive, as if they were watching him. Then the ground trembled. Not much, just a small vibration beneath Langley's feet. But he felt it in his chest, in his teeth, in his skull. Sheriff Grayson groaned, his head snapping back violently, his body convulsing. The chanting grew louder, a crescendo of voices, an inhuman harmony that made Langley's skin crawl. And then he heard it. A voice. Not Silas's, not any of the followers. Something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. It was deep, inhuman, layered with whispers that slithered into his mind like writhing serpents. It spoke only one word. Open. The escaped Langley reacted instinctively. With a sudden jerk, he broke free from his captors, grabbing the nearest object, a candle holder, and smashing it into one of their faces. The moment his grip loosened, he reached for his gun and fired. The bullet struck one of the symbols on the wall and the room shuddered. A sharp, inhuman screech echoed through the air. The ground quaked violently, knocking several followers to their knees. Silas's eyes widened. Langley had no idea what he had just done, but he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. He lunged for Sheriff Grayson, hoisting him up, ignoring the weight. Then he ran. Bullets fired behind him, whether from the cultists or something else, he didn't know. He didn't care. He crashed through the farmhouse doors, dragging Grayson with him, sprinting toward his car. Come on, he muttered, shoving the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Behind him, the farmhouse glowed, symbols burning with an unnatural light, the air around it distorting like heat waves off pavement. Silas stood in the doorway, watching him leave, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Langley didn't wait to find out why. He sped down the road, leaving the Corbin family and whatever darkness lurked beneath them behind. Epilogue. Sheriff Tom Grayson survived. Barely. It took weeks for him to recover, and even then, he was never the same. He refused to talk about what had happened. Sometimes, in his sleep, he would whisper things, words in a language no one recognized. As for Silas Corbin, the farmhouse was abandoned when Langley returned with backup. The followers were gone. No trace of the Corbin family remained. But the symbols were still there, burned into the walls, etched into the very earth. And sometimes, at night, people swore they could still hear chanting from deep within the woods. Langley left Willowbrook soon after, but one thing haunted him long after the case was closed. Silas Corbin had told him that the world was on the brink of something great. Langley had stopped the ritual, but he had the sinking feeling that it wasn't over, that it had only just begun. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, hit that like button and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And let me know on which topic you would like to see stories next. And check out these other stories you might enjoy. See you in the next one. Till then, take care and goodbye.